They call it the loneliest road in America, a ribbon of asphalt across Nevada's Great Basin. In 1986, a national magazine even warned motorists not to attempt it unless they were confident of their survival skills. And though they were quite put off of it, the Nevada locals didn't flinch. They turned the insult into a dare, and then a legend. But loneliness isn't the whole story. It's just one chapter in a road that helped stitch the country together from the auto trail era to the numbered highways. So today we're talking about US Route 50, how it began, how it almost broke in the middle, and how a very lonely section of highway got its name. As we go beyond the exit. US Route 50 today runs from Ocean City, Maryland to West Sacramento, California, crossing 12 states and the District of Columbia in just over 3,000 miles. It spans tidewater marshes, Appalachian ridges, prairie farmland, and alpine passes, and yes, long, stark valleys where the desert breathes. The lonely part, though, is mostly in Nevada, but US 50's story stretches out much farther than that. The Midland Trail. Before US 50 had a number, it had a name, and that name was the Midland Trail. It was one of the earliest attempts to chart a cross-country road for automobiles. Officially organized in 1913, but it was dreamed up a year earlier by an auto club based out of Grand Junction, Colorado. In those days, there were no federal systems, no standardized signage, just passionate promoters stitching together whatever county and state roads they could find. The Midland Trail began in Washington, D.C. and rolled through Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. It crossed Kentucky by way of Lexington and Louisville and pushed westward through St. Louis and Kansas City. From there, it climbed up into Denver, where things got a little trickier. Beyond Denver, the Rocky Mountains offered no single easy crossing. Instead, motorists had to pick which pass they were going to take, and there were quite a few to choose from. Each one of them was a rugged gamble for the fragile cars of the 1910s and 1915s. On the western slope, the trail funneled back into Grand Junction, then stretched out into the deserts of Utah. Here, the Midland latched onto the ghostly alignments of the Overland Trail and the Pony Express route, with waypoints like Fish Springs and Ibapaw, Utah. In Nevada, it passed through Ely, Tonopah, and then turned south near Goldfield before crossing its way into California. Here, the road branched out several different ways, one toward San Francisco and another toward Los Angeles. By 1917, the LA spur was dominant, but the Midland, like many trails, remained a bit fluid at the edges. What held it together wasn't pavement, it was promotion. Boosters like George A. Bond, the national president of the Midland Trail Association, and W. Gillette Scott, its fierce vice president in California, fought tooth and nail to keep the route relevant. Scott, in particular, had a flair for drama. In 1922, when Nevada's state highway plans seemed to favor the rival Victory Highway and the Arrowhead Trail, he fired off protests, calling the Midland the main great route through the central part of the state, and demanding fair play. Sometimes promotion took odd turns. In Kansas, a Red Line basketball team barnstormed across the state, using their games to advertise the Midland route. Volunteers even painted telephone poles in red markings to guide motorists along the trail. These weren't just quirky stunts, they were survival tactics in a fierce competition between trail associations. Dozens of highways vied for recognition, and only the loudest or best connected seemed to survive. Despite the chaos, the Midland Trail left its mark. It carried early motorists through coal towns in West Virginia, across the farm plains of Kansas, into the mining camps of Nevada, and eventually into the cities of California. It was a road that bound together boosters, farmers, ranchers, and dreamers under one single promise. You could drive from the Atlantic to the Pacific on one continuous, if often treacherous, path. By the mid-1920s, though, the landscape of American highways was a mess. Over 250 named trails overlapped and contradicted each other. Signs were inconsistent, routes shifted with politics, and motorists never quite knew which official road to trust. The Midland Trail had prestige, but it was about to give way to something much bigger: the era of the numbered highways. From names to numbers, and the birth of US 50. By the mid-1920s, America's road system was busting at the seams. Everywhere you turned, there seemed to be another one: the Midland, the Lincoln, the Victory. Each of these highways was promoted by its own association, complete with dues, slogans, and painted poles. For motorists, it was a tangle of conflicting signs and maps. To bring order, the federal government knew it was time to step in. In 1925, the Joint Board on Interstate Highways was formed, a panel of state engineers chaired by Thomas H. McDonald, head of the Bureau of Public Roads, with E.W. James as secretary. The board's task was to sweep away the clutter of the names and replace them with the numbered grid: even numbers for east-west roads and odd numbers for the ones that ran north to south. On November 11, 1926, when the U.S. highway system was officially adopted, much of the Midland spine became US 50. It ran nearly coast to coast from Annapolis, Maryland on the Chesapeake Bay to Sacramento, California, carrying with it the legacy of the old trail associations. But US 50 had its problems. It wasn't quite seamless. The notorious Utah-Nevada Gap left a hole in its continuity. Between Delta, Utah, and Ely, Nevada, the route was little more than a rough desert track. You see, one of the provisions of the numbered highway system was that the federal government would pay half the cost of the road. The only problem is that the state had to come up with the other half. Well, the federal plan wanted US 50 to go west out of Salt Lake City, following an old alignment of the Lincoln Highway. Utah and the locals weren't that interested in that plan, though. That's because the Lincoln had shot across a section that nobody wanted to be a part of. It was desolate, it was desert, and it was wide open. There wasn't much reason for spending all that money in paving it, so they simply decided not to. They poured their money into what was the Victory Highway, which kind of follows the alignment of US 80 now. In fact, for the first few decades, motorists were forced to swing north all the way to Salt Lake City before rejoining the highway in Nevada. It wasn't until the 1950s, when US 6 was extended through the Great Basin, that US 50 was moved northward and could finally stretch across the desert in a straight shot. By the late 1920s, US 50 was already one of America's great cross-country routes. Coast-to-coast expansion. Well, at first, US 50 could not be called a coast-to-coast highway. Even though it began in Annapolis, Maryland, it only went to Sacramento, California, an impressive span, but not yet a true ocean-to-ocean highway. But that was set to change in just a few years. In the early 1930s, US 50 was extended west into San Francisco. For the first time, US 50 reached the Pacific Ocean. Soon after, the East followed suit. In 1949, US 50 was extended from Annapolis across Maryland's eastern shore to Ocean City, a bustling seaside resort. That gave the highway a perfect bookend: Atlantic surf at one end, Pacific waves at the other. States capitalized on the symbolism. On each coast, highway departments erected mileage signboards linking the two termini. Ocean City, Maryland, 3,073 miles, and later realignments shortened the road. But the signs captured the romance of a country stitched together by one road. By the 1950s, however, the age of the interstate highway system began to reshape the map. The new freeways often paralleled US 50 but bypassed its towns. The interstates started to capture the crowds. US 50 kept the wide open spaces, a personality that would set the stage for its most famous nickname: Nevada and the Loneliest Road. By the 1980s, US 50 had already weathered decades of change. It no longer stretched to San Francisco, but in the west it carried something the interstates couldn't offer: silence and solitude. And nowhere was that more obvious than central Nevada. This is the stretch that gave US 50 its fame. About 287 miles from Fernley to Ely, crossing the Great Basin's stark landscape. The road threads through 17 mountain passes, each separated by vast valleys of sagebrush and sky. Between the towns of Fallon, Austin, Eureka, and Ely, you can drive 100 miles or more with nothing but the hum of your tires and the occasional coyote. In July 1986, Life magazine singled out this portion of US 50 with a headline that stuck: "The Loneliest Road in America." Quoting a AAA spokesman, which remained anonymous, the article warned, "It's totally empty. There are no points of interest, and we don't recommend it." We warn all motorists not to drive there unless they're confident of their survival skills. For Nevadans, it was a slap in the face. To them, the road wasn't barren. It was alive with history. Locals knew what outsiders missed. US 50 followed the path of the Pony Express, skirted old mining camps, and whispered stories of ghost towns tucked in the hills. But rather than fighting the label, Nevada turned it into an advantage. Within months, the state's Tourism Commission launched the Highway 50 Survival Guide. Travelers could collect stamps at the key towns: Findlay, Fallon, Austin, Eureka, and Ely, and after completing the route, received a certificate signed by the governor declaring, "I survived the loneliest road in America." The guide brochure that they built cheekily inverted the AAA warning, saying, "We don't recommend it, we dare you." And it worked. What began as an insult became a marketing triumph. Curiosity seekers came to prove themselves. Motorcyclists and families posed with their certificates. Local businesses picked up new traffic. Eureka even branded itself the friendliest town on the loneliest road. And in truth, the emptiness was the attraction. Along the way are ancient petroglyphs, abandoned stagecoach stations, and near the Utah border, the dark skies of Great Basin National Park. By embracing their nickname, Nevada transformed US 50 into something more than a highway. It became a rite of passage, a test of whether you could appreciate beauty in the quiet and the wide open. Today, more than 30 years later, the survival guide is still offered, and the loneliest road still dares you to take it. Far from empty, it's a museum of Western history stretched out under the desert sun. The Midland Trail, US 50, and its legacy. From its start as the Midland Trail in 1913, a painted line of telephone poles, and a dream carried by auto clubs, to its rebirth as US 50 in 1926, this road has always been more than just pavement. By the mid-20th century, US 50 wore the proud title of a true coast-to-coast highway, touching both the Atlantic and the Pacific. Later, as the interstates took the spotlight, US 50 found its personality in what was left behind. Then came 1986 and Life magazine's infamous insult. Nevada's wide-open segment became a destination precisely because it was lonely, and the travelers were coming not for roadside attractions or neon billboards, but for the absence of them, for the sound of the wind over sagebrush, the feel of a two-lane ribbon stretching to the horizon, and the chance to hear your own thoughts without interruption. And that's the paradox of US 50. It's a road built to connect, yet it's remembered for its solitude. Well, we hoped you enjoyed US 50, the loneliest road, but we'd love to hear about other areas. It's a much larger highway covering over 3,000 miles. If you've got a topic about US Route 50 or a segment you'd like us to do in maybe a short or a long form, drop us a comment below. We try to answer all of them personally. Why don't you jump in the car with us by subscribing to the channel? We'll be glad to take you along through all of our deep dives as we explore two-lane America and the histories hiding in plain sight. As always, we appreciate you being here. We want to thank you for watching, and God bless.